So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rachel to everybody. Rachel Haukkala, she's an associate planner at Compass. She's been with them since 2017, and she leads their public transportation and Railwith Trails planning effort. So Rachel's going to talk to us about how high capacity transit can fit within the larger transportation system. And she's going to go ahead and talk about the survey that many of you have filled out and what they'll be doing with those results. Rachel, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you everyone who has joined today. Excited to talk about the Compass High Capacity Transit Survey. As Cynthia said, I am Rachel Haukkala. I'm a planner at Compass working on long-range transit planning, Railwith Trails, and right now Compass has this survey open until February 27th that looks at high-capacity transit options for the region. So we hope that you will all participate in the survey if you haven't yet, to help plan for the system that best meets your needs. Today, I will discuss who Compass is for anyone that's not familiar and our role in transportation planning for Ada and Canyon counties. Then I'll give background on the survey and how you can be involved. First, what is Compass? It's an acronym for the Community Planning Association of Southwest Idaho. We are an association of governments that plans for the future of Ada and Canyon counties. Our vision statement reads, the forum for regional collaboration in Southwest Idaho that helps maintain a healthy and economically vibrant region, offering people choices in how and where they live, work, play, and travel. Our mission is to conduct regional planning, facilitate coordination and cooperation, serve as a source of information and expertise on issues affecting Southwest Idaho, and assist member agencies in accessing funding to accomplish local and regional goals. We have a board of directors that guides our vision. They give us staff direction on what to do. They're mainly made up of local elected officials like mayors, city council members, county commissioners, highway district commissioners, and others. So everyone who lives in Ada or Canyon County is represented on the Compass board by multiple people. Compass has four main roles to fulfill our vision. They're planning, mainly transportation planning, implementing those plans with the funding piece, providing technical expertise and data, and facilitating regional cooperation and collaboration among members and residents. Today we'll be discussing the region's long-range transportation plan and one of a series of surveys to gain public input into what goes into that plan. Compass develops a long-range transportation plan for Ada and Canyon counties, which is known as Communities in Motion. It's a transportation plan that looks out at least 20 years into the future, forecasts growth for Ada and Canyon counties, and then plans a transportation system that meets the needs of that growth. And this includes all modes: bicycle, pedestrian, transit, cars, freight. It uses a financial forecast so that we know what we can reasonably expect to be able to pay, because we can only show those projects as funded in this plan. And it relies on public and agency involvement and feedback. So your participation is critical in helping us develop a plan that reflects your needs today and into the future. The current plan is Communities in Motion 2040 2.0, which plans a transportation system for the year 2040. It's an online plan that you can find on the Compass website. We're now updating it to look to the year 2050. This is a multi-year process to update the plan. We have public input at multiple stages in the process. We started this one in the year 2019, and it's due to be adopted by the Compass Board of Directors in December of 2022. Right now, we're about halfway through the process. The survey we'll be discussing today is the third in a series of public surveys to inform this plan. Many different things are feeding into Communities in Motion 2050. We have completed the first few steps, including developing a future population forecast. and we're forecasting just under 1.1 million people in the 2 counties by 2050. Next is a fiscal impact analysis, which essentially looks at how different types of growth could affect the bottom lines of local jurisdictions to answer the question, would this or that type of growth pay for itself? Other things that are in process or yet to come include the survey on options for future high-capacity transit. This is what we'll talk about today. An update to Compass's 2009 Complete Streets policy to make it a complete network policy. And that looks at how we can integrate all of those different modes that I mentioned, bike, ped, transit, all of the others together with a cohesive system for the region that allows people to get anywhere they want to go with a good network. Next is the financial forecast and funding plan. As I mentioned, it can't just be a wish list, it must be fiscally constrained. And lastly, the transportation and growth vision for the year 2050, which encompasses the population forecast and the results of the first 2 surveys, in addition to the survey that we'll be discussing today, the third one. So what was in those first 2 surveys? The first survey was conducted in fall of 2019. It asked people about how they see the future changing, and we received over 3,700 responses. The second survey was last summer, had over 3,100 responses. And in that survey, people weighed in on their values, support for different ways we could grow, and implementation strategies to achieve the future they want to see. That information will be used to develop the Communities in Motion 2050 Growth and Transportation Vision, which sets out where we think growth will occur between now and 2050 and the transportation system needed to accommodate it. Also, the goals and objectives for the plan and the implementation strategies needed to achieve the vision and goals. Those 2 surveys also told us that people are interested in high capacity transit. So this third survey will delve deeper into people's needs and expectations regarding that. In the first survey, which was called A Lot Can Change in 30 Years, we asked how likely people would be to use different methods of transportation. And rail, which is one type of high capacity transit, ranked the second highest after drive myself for the most very likely responses. In the second survey, people shared support for different types of future growth and transportation scenarios. 2 of those scenarios featured a robust transit system, and those 2 scenarios were Ticket to Ride and Come Together. They were both by far the most popular. Ticket to Ride had the most transit and was the only one with the rail line, and Come Together had the second most transit, and they essentially tied for the most desirable. So based on those results from those 2 surveys, we're planning this third survey to look at what could that high capacity transit system look like. If anyone's not familiar with the term high capacity transit, broadly it refers to a transit service that carries more people and is faster than a local bus. So the buses that we have out there today with Valley Regional Transit. It has service improvements like increased frequency, separation from other traffic in most cases, in addition to passenger amenities like nicer bus stops, off-board fare payment, which improve the user experience and increase the speed and the reliability. It can include light rail, commuter rail, or bus rapid transit, which is essentially a bus that functions more like a train. It's something that Compass has been looking at for the region for many years. In 2009, Compass conducted a study of different options for high capacity transit in the region. In that study, we updated last year. Both of these are available on the Compass website. And we had an education series last week about the 2020 study. You can find that recording on our website, the discussion with our consultant. These studies focused on high capacity transit south of the Boise River, roughly parallel to the Interstate 84. since there's already a plan moving forward for a bus rapid transit service on State Street and State Highway 44, which is north of the river. This service would connect Caldwell, Nampa, Meridian, and Boise. We considered multiple routes in the study, but these 4 were determined to be the most feasible, the best fit for the region. They are Fairview Cherry, Franklin Road, the Boise Cutoff, which is the railroad corridor, and then the interstate. The study also looked at 4 different options: commuter rail, light rail, bus rapid transit exclusive, which means it has its own lane, and bus rapid transit mixed traffic. Each of these has pros and cons. Commuter rail is the fastest and it can take the most people, but it doesn't stop as frequently. Light rail is a little slower, a little bit lower capacity, but it's better than the bus options. It's also the most expensive. Bus rapid transit exclusive, since it has its own lane, it's a little bit more like the train options. It's less expensive though. And then lastly, bus rapid transit in mixed traffic is the most flexible, the least expensive, but it can get stuck in traffic more, so it's slower. In the survey, we ask about features you want in a service so that we can align the type of service with community needs. So now I'll walk through what the survey looks like. It is online. If you participated in the previous 2 surveys, you'll notice it looks similar, can be accessed with any device that can get on the internet, like a smartphone or a computer. There's also a tutorial for the mobile version on our website if you'll be using your phone to take the survey. We also have a Spanish version and accessible version and an offline version. So as you start the survey, you'll see some brief background information about this project. And then we'll ask about a few different trade-offs that you'll find within the different high capacity transit options. So some of the things I talked about, like the speed versus having more stops. And we'll ask you to select where you fall on the scale. Are you more on the right side, left side, or neutral? There's also various options to add comments in the survey. Here, there's one on the top and then on each question as well. So if you want to give more information about your answers, or maybe it was difficult to select, you can explain that at those locations. And then make sure you answer all questions here with trade-offs. There are 4 different questions there. Then, oh, that's circling the 2 comment boxes. The next screen is about destinations. So we're hoping to learn more about the trips people are taking or were taking before COVID changed everything. So you can drag these pins onto the map. It's kind of like a Google map where you can zoom in, you can pan to get your pins in the right place. It's optional to what you want to provide as far as information. And then you'll also see a couple of questions inside each pin asking, would you use high capacity transit for this trip if it was available? So we ask that you drop a few pins on the map for us. And then we have a few more questions about the service preferences. So you can select the option that fits best, and there's another place for comments. And remember to answer all 4 questions there. And then last, we have a wrap-up screen with some demographics questions that'll help us understand what people's needs are and who we're reaching with our outreach efforts. We want to make sure we're getting a broad swath of the community. We have a question there on top about, would you actually use a high capacity transit if it was in place? There's also the option to say, no, you don't think we should do this at all. So we want to hear what your opinion is, whichever side it's on. And we hope that you'll help us share the survey. There's a few options to share directly with social media. And all of this is optional on this page. So your responses to the survey will help us narrow the potential route and type of service. The survey results will feed into multiple aspects of our long-range plan, including the growth and transportation vision that will be the background for the plan. This is what that looked like for our 2040 plan. This will help inform where development will go in the future to align with the high capacity transit service and where land should be preserved. This vision will be approved later this year. So for example, the high capacity transit, depending on where the stops are located, there might be higher densities expected in the future to make sure that the land use fits the transportation context. It's also important to keep in mind that this project is just one piece of the broader vision for transit in the valley. For any high capacity transit service to work, it needs a robust bus system to feed it. So the survey results and what we do with them will be combined with the broader transit network and Valley Connect 2.0 plans for expansion, which is Valley Regional Transit's plan for expanding and improving their existing bus service. They have an intermediate and growth scenario that plans for nearer term and longer term expansion of their system, and encompasses current long range plan, Communities in Motion 2040 2.0, is even longer term, building on those plans. And now we're looking to the year 2050. So we'll be developing the transit network that we think we'll want to have by the year 2050. In addition, as I mentioned, there are also the plans for bus rapid transit on State Street. And that would probably come before the high capacity transit that I'm talking about today. So like I said, we're planning for the year 2050, which is quite a way out, but the time to plan for this is now, because it does take a long time to get through the whole process from planning to running the first train and starting service. So expect it will take at least 10 to 20 years to achieve, possibly more. It depends on the options we choose and how long it takes to get all of our steps in order. There's also, of course, bicycle and pedestrian needs, along with transit services and high capacity transit as well. In addition to getting to high capacity transit by bus, some people would want to bike or walk there. This map is showing our plan for the regional bike and pathway network for 2040. So we have pathway plans in the works at Compass that will be feeding into our 2050 plan, and we'll want to make sure that the high capacity transit is well connected for those first and last mile and the regional connectivity. We also have Railwith Trail's planning efforts at Compass, which is looking at putting a multi-use pathway along the railroad corridor from Nampa through Meridian out to Boise, and then all the way down into southeast Boise. So that's another effort. If we decide that the rail line is the best option for the high capacity transit service, then that will go hand in hand with the pathway planning. And that study cover shot is from a 2019 study that Compass did with a consultant to look at the alignment and the different design features for the trail. So in the future, we'll need to look at more at how that will connect with any high capacity transit option as well. For anyone that's not familiar with Railwith Trail, that means there's a rail line in place, often for freight or passenger transportation or both, and then it may be active still. We're not suggesting to remove the rail tracks, just putting a trail in there in that same right of way. Since it's already there, it provides a nice, safer than the roadway pathway system for a trail. We would need to work with Union Pacific for that, but that's another feature going on. So in the bigger picture of Communities in Motion 2050, like I said, we're planning for the complete transportation system, including the roadways, all of those active transportation elements, freight, and public transportation, including both buses and the high capacity transit service. The 2050 transit plan will incorporate the results of the public survey for the preferences on high capacity transit, as well as Valley Connect 2.0, As part of that process, we'll identify the needs and the funded transportation projects, and we'll prioritize the unfunded projects so that we can be ready when and if funding becomes available. As part of prioritizing the unfunded projects, we'll develop a phasing plan and funding strategies. We'll be continuing to work on this plan through 2022. At that time, we'll ask for your feedback on the draft plan, so keep an eye out for that. And then our board is scheduled to adopt the plan by December of 2022. Then we'll begin to implement it and start to work on its update again as we continue that cycle. So to wrap up, we're looking for your feedback on high capacity transit options for the Treasure Valley to plan for the high capacity transit service that best meets your needs. So please take the survey and help us spread the word. You can find it on our website, compassidaho.org. It's open until February 27th. And we had one open house yesterday. It was recorded on Facebook. We'll have another one tomorrow, Thursday. If you know anyone that would want to learn more about this that couldn't attend this presentation, or if you want to hear more about it again, it'll be a similar presentation. We, as I mentioned, had the education series last Tuesday that delved deeper into the study. So if you want to hear more about that, you can find that recording online as well. So I can now take any questions.
Thanks, Rachel. That was really interesting. I've lived in this valley for just shy of 30 years, and we've been hearing about some type of high capacity transit for a long time. So this makes it feel as though it could become a reality in the next couple of decades, right?
Yeah.
I did notice that there was a question. Morty, are you there? You wanted to ask about the project in Las Vegas? He might not be there. I'll ask this question. I threw this out to kind of everybody. How has the BRT project worked in Las Vegas? Appears successful, but not very familiar with it. I don't know anything about that project, or if there's a project in another community. Anybody wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one either, but there are a lot of good examples of bus rapid transit projects around the country. It used to be less common, but it's becoming a much more common type of high capacity transit to use because of the lower cost and the flexibility. It's easier to change your route if you need to in the future.
Thanks.
I have a question.
Okay.
I should know the answer to this, but I'm gonna frame it as maybe we'll pretend that I don't, and that there are other people that don't as well, because I assume. So tell me, it's my understanding that so Compass is gathering this information and gathering participation feedback from the community. But what role does Compass actually play in the implementation? Because like on that one slide where you kind of walked through the process, the last piece was implementation of the plan. But it's my understanding that, I mean, like, explain to me, like, how does Compass see implementing this? What role do they play?
Good question. So yeah, Compass's main roles include facilitating that regional collaboration. So we have all of our members are the cities, counties, highway districts, everyone that deals with transportation in Ada and Canyon counties. So we're kind of a forum for working together on these regional issues like high capacity transit. So for example, we have a public transportation work group that focuses on transit. We have planners from the cities, counties. So we're working on these issues together. And so with the survey results, we'll be able to narrow down the options that we're looking at as we continue to plan and refine our cost estimates and all those different features. And then we do need to get a better dedicated long-term funding source in place. So that's one important step that we're working on, and we have lobbyists at the state level and the federal level trying to get more transportation funding to the area. But for the longer term, as far as actually operating a high capacity transit, that would probably fall to Valley Regional Transit, since they are operating the bus system already. That would be the natural owner of the actual service.
So sort of related to that, image that you showed where you looked at VRTs 2.0 versus the Communities in Motion 2040, those maps were different, like not by much, but there was enough differences there. So I guess I sort of imagine that Compass is doing some of the outreach that then would feed into VRT's plan. So how does it work? The fact that those two don't quite, they didn't seem like they quite linked up. So do they not? Do they take your opinion with a grain of salt and go and create their own, or like how do they communicate?
Yeah, so Valley Regional Transit, really the simple separation between us is Valley Regional Transit's more focused on their shorter term planning, and then Compass is looking more at the longer term. So in that slide you're talking about, the Two Valley Connect 2.0 scenarios, we're planning for a shorter term, like 5 to 10 years transit expansion. And then the Compass map was looking at 2040. So we are building on Valley Connect plans. We work together to develop when Valley Regional Transit's developing their plans and when we're developing ours. So our 2040 plan built on the Valley Connect to add even more transit service. And then now we're looking to the year 2050. So we'll be building even further upon that. So we do work closely with Valley Regional Transit on those service planning.
And if nobody else is jumping in, I've got one more. So I live off of State Street. And so I've always been really interested in, it seems like there has been a lot of discussions in the past about the possibility of a bus rapid transit on State Street, at least as like the lowest cost solution to get some sort of high capacity on that route. Is Compass involved at all with lobbying at the legislation or at the State House for the changes that are required in order for that to take place? Because it's my understanding that it's currently not legal. And I don't know if maybe I misunderstand that, but it's my understanding that it's not legal right now to do like what is considered bus rapid transit, whether that's a carpool lane or however it's categorized.
Yeah, that is correct. So currently, the issue is high occupancy vehicle lanes, because that's what the plan is to use for the bus lanes. So it would be high occupancy vehicles, basically a carpool or a bus is able to use that lane, so that, the difference is bus rapid transit, sometimes it'll just have its own lane that's just for buses, but the State Street plan is looking at high occupancy vehicle lanes. And right now, the Idaho statute says that only counties with a population of less than 25,000 and the county has to include a resort city, those are the only places that you can do high occupancy vehicle or HOV lanes. And we do have a lobbyist at Compass who goes to the state and tries to change that every year. It's always on their list. The other big one is local option taxing. That's another Idaho statute and we can't do local option taxing of any kind in this region. And that's one of the most common ways that transit systems, and especially the high capacity transit options, are funded, because you can go out, the people can vote on it and say, yeah, we want to add this local option tax to raise funding for these services. And we can't do that here. So that's another one that we have a lobbyist working on.
I have a question, Rachel, about funding. I know that light rail is a different cost than buses, but how much money needs to be raised to see something more robust in our valley? Do you know?
Yes, so in the study that we had done last year, our consultant did estimate costs. And with the high capacity transit, there's both the capital, which is like the upfront paying for the vehicles and the tracks and all of that. And then there's an ongoing operations cost every year. And the cost does vary quite a bit between light rail is the most expensive. They looked at similar projects and thought that for our light rail, we're looking at between Caldwell and Boise, they estimated around $2 billion. And then the lower cost option would be bus rapid transit, which again, looking at similar projects in similar areas to us, that would be around $200 to $300 million. So it is quite a bit. That's why we need the dedicated funding source, because today Valley Regional Transit has to fund the transit system via going out to ask the cities to basically help them, taking funds out of their general fund to contribute. Whereas most places, actually, we're one of 2 states in the country that doesn't have a dedicated funding source for public transit. It's just us in Mississippi. So that's one thing that the region needs, regardless of whether we move forward with high capacity transit, just to improve the bus system we have.
Thanks. Any other questions that anybody has for Rachel?
Hi, this is Stephanie. I have 2 questions. The first one is kind of an easy one. You showed a slide, and when I took the survey, I saw it, and I didn't understand. Let it be, Ticket to Ride, Penny Lane, and Come Together. I think I get Let It Be and Ticket to Ride, but I don't know. Maybe just if you could explain all of them, that would help me.
Sure, yeah. So those were the 4 scenarios in the previous survey that we did last summer. So that survey is closed. But you can see the results on our website. You can see.
What I looked at, yeah.
Okay, yeah, you can see the descriptions of them and more information. But basically, Let It Be was the kind of business as usual, kind of just continuing to grow as we are, focusing on roads and widening and not a lot of money for transit. And then Penny Lane was focusing more on affordability and trying to keep like kind of looking at fiscal impact, and that was kind of the focus of that one. And then the Ticket to Ride had a robust transit improvement, so there's a lot of transit and more density, and it had a high capacity transit like the one we're talking about today. And then Come Together was it had the second most transit out of the 4 options, and I can't think of right now what the other kind of focus of it was, but Come Together and Ticket to Ride were the 2 favored options. So our planners are now working on creating a preferred growth scenario based on the responses from those 4, which will be one of the foundational pieces of our Communities in Motion 2050. So that'll be coming out pretty soon. So there'll be some kind of combination of the 2.
Okay. Thank you. And then my last question, we were talking about, transportation kind of leads to pollution, which leads to air, that's air quality. Are there ever discussions about climate as they kind of talk about, emissions and transportation, and just quality of, life in these areas where there's going to be increased population?
Yeah, so like climate change and the negative effects of the automobiles. Yeah, we definitely do have discussions of that in our plan. That's part of the reason we want to make sure we're planning for the transit and the bike and pedestrian systems, because we know that we need to have alternatives to car travel, especially with that growth that we're projecting over 1 million people by the year 2040. So with that, we can't just keep having everyone get around in cars. We really need to have a expanded bus system. And yeah, the air quality is something that Compass has to monitor as well. So we keep tabs on that and we produce regular reports about that aspect as well.
Do we have, is there data or a correlation to health outcomes? You know, like, so air quality, we have more people with asthma or more people with lung disease or whatever. Is there a correlation there?
I have heard that, yeah, for not at Compass. I don't know if we have something specifically about that, but I've heard that within the country about studies looking at the health impacts of neighborhoods that are right next to interstates, for example, especially in big cities. I've heard that, yeah, there's health impacts, possibly asthma, I think was one of the things they mentioned, but yeah, it's definitely a connection there.
Thank you.
Eric Selikoff has a question. I'll read this, but Eric, jump in if you want to. Is there a big difference between BRT mixed traffic and traditional express bus routes?
That's a good question. I think I would have to say they're pretty similar. Actually, I guess the main difference is, in my understanding, express bus routes usually are kind of a origin or one place to another place. So it might be like there's a stop in Caldwell and then a stop in Boise, and it's kind of just getting you from here to there. And Valley Regional Transit today has some routes like that. If there's only a couple stops on each end, I think that would be considered more of an express. Whereas bus rapid transit and mixed traffic, both of them are operating in mixed traffic, but bus rapid transit and mixed traffic would have more stops along the way. They would still be more spaced out than a regular local bus. And bus rapid transit also comes with these more defined passenger stations. They might look more like a light rail station with the big shelter, and they might have off-board fare payment and different amenities at the bus stops, more benches, and maybe the signboards that's telling you when your next bus is coming. And they're usually branded differently too. The buses are. They might have a specific look that differentiates them from the regular local buses. And then they're often the longer buses as well to get that increased capacity. So yeah, they are very similar in some ways, but a little bit of a difference there.
Okay, and I know that Carl Whaley, who I know worked in transit for many years, I believe down in Arizona, Phoenix, Tucson, I can't remember which community.
Worked on it down in Phoenix for about 9 years, and they're still expanding their light rail, but they had a better funding source. They were able to fund it locally or do a local sales tax. The city of Tempe has got even more additional sales tax in their town, so they're doing a lot of work down there.
Great, thanks, Carl. I noticed that you you referred to an article on the Bloomberg City Lab. Okay, that there's an article there on the cost of light rail. Thanks for that. Lisa Appleby had a question. I'll read this, and then Lisa, if you want to jump in, feel free. How quantitative is the analysis of GHG in the report? What's GHG?
Greenhouse gases.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you asking about the high capacity transit study or the air quality reporting that Compass does?
Well, I guess I'm asking about the reporting and also in seeking the funds and how you're tying that analysis to fund seeking, since it looks like climate change and greenhouse gases may be an issue again when it comes to funding.
Yeah, it definitely is an issue. So Compass tracks air quality regularly, and there's specific types of pollutants that we have to track for our region. And that's just kind of one of the MPO roles. You can find those on our website. I'm not super familiar with those, but definitely as we move forward with the high capacity transit project, if the survey results tell us we should, and if our board wants us to continue with this, in one of the major funding sources, at least for the capital part of high capacity transit systems, is there's a few federal sources, there's new starts, small starts that are pretty large, and they require a pretty robust environmental review. There's a NEPA process, which is an acronym for that, but basically you have to look at the environmental impacts of the service, the light rail line or whatever it is. You have to make sure that you get to know about all the different impacts on your community and the route and the mode you choose. You have to really analyze the environmental side of it. And so with that, I think there would be a look at the greenhouse gases, or just in general, any air quality impacts and just overall environmental impacts. There's a lot within that. So if we get to that stage, we'll definitely be looking more at that environmental side.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question for Rachel? Wow, Rachel, you did a great job today. We really appreciate all of the info. And I know that you, I know that you want to make sure that everybody answers the survey if they haven't done so already. Sarah, you put the survey up, right? In the chat? Yeah, there it is. So we just encourage people, oh, wait a minute, Dave Foch has something. If we're looking at a single light rail line, it would still require people to get to the line. How does the plan accommodate getting people to and from the line? Great question, Dave.
Yeah, that definitely is an important aspect. The study that we did last year it looked at that a little bit. It looked at the connectivity for bicycle and pedestrian modes to get to the different alignments and where the stations might be, and looked at park and ride options or the likelihood that it would work, and it looked at auto access to the line. And also it looked at the comparison of the Valley Connect plans and the 2040 transit network connections. But that was kind of a higher level, just in the analysis to compare the different options. But as we move forward, we'll be doing a lot of analysis to make sure that the bus system can get people to and from the high capacity transit. Like I said, we're looking to the year 2050 now. So with the results from the survey, we'll hopefully have an idea of which routes might be the best fits, and then we'll design the bus system around that to make it kind of feed the high capacity transit. And we'll also look at bicycle connections and the sidewalk infrastructure to get people to there. And then also park and rides are usually around these type of high capacity transit systems as well for people that need to drive in. So we will be considering all of the modes and how they connect to the line to get those first and last mile and just connections in general.
First and last mile, super important. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. The link is in the chat. If people haven't filled out the survey yet, please do go ahead and do that. So Jim Byrne has a question. How much has Compass considered the Watco Boise Valley Railroad as the backbone between Boise and Caldwell, with the possibility of using right-of-way for mixed-use path in the Union Pacific right-of-way, then build off of this over time?
Yes, that is, I think, was one of the first routes that was of interest in the region. we used to have Amtrak service on that rail line until just the late 90s. And so we've seen passenger service there. Obviously, the different depots of the cities were used for that reason. And then a few years after Amtrak left, Valley Regional Transit did a study to look at the railroad line to see what it would take to bring that up to passenger service again, because now it's still used for freight. The part between Caldwell and Nampa is a main line for Union Pacific, so it's heavily used. It would be harder to share that with the passenger service, but the Boise cutoff part between Nampa to Boise only has a few trains a week, so that lower volume is favorable for adding a passenger transportation. So that is one of the routes we're looking at. We would have to negotiate with Union Pacific and Watco and the Boise Valley, all of those rail companies because they own it, so they need to allow it or not. We are also planning for a multi-use trail or pathway, which we're calling a Railwith Trail. We would hope to put the trail in the right of way, like you said. So that's another planning effort that we have going on at Compass. We have a Rails with Trails work group at Compass that works on this throughout the year. So basically, short answer is yes, we are looking at that for high capacity transit and for trail use.
I'm just curious, how is it to work with the railroad companies? Are they receptive?
I have not met with them personally myself yet, but we have had Compass and Meridian, City of Meridian, and other regional partners have had discussions with Union Pacific and Watco in the past. And at that time, at least Union Pacific was not very interested in allowing a passenger transportation or a trail in their right of way. So we will continue to work with them, and that's why we're still doing these plans now, is so that we can take this to them and say, here's what we would want to do, here's how it could look, and here's how we can mitigate all of your concerns, because they, as you would expect, have concerns about safety, liability, trespassing, all of those issues. So if we can bring them a good plan, and then also what our consultant for the study has worked on a lot of these projects, and they say there's always a negotiation. They almost never want this from the start, so that's to be expected, but we can work together. And if we wanted to bring the high capacity transit to share on their rail line, we would need to make improvements. Like I said, we might need to add a second track. So a lot of those improvements would also benefit Union Pacific. So hopefully we can find some kind of win-win in the future for if we choose to pursue high capacity transit on their rails, or if it's just a trail or both. It'll be a negotiation.
Yeah, like everything else, that's probably going to take a while, but at least you're working on it. Yeah, good. Carl, I wondered if you wanted to pipe in on anything. I know you've had experience with that. You were shaking your head no.
My experience with the freight lines is, like Rachel said, not very hopeful. They don't want to get involved in that at all.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Yeah. So we're just going to add, that's part of the reason that we are looking at those other routes as well. As I mentioned, the top three alternatives we're looking at, in addition to the rail line, are Fairview, Franklin, and the interstate. So we need to make sure we have backups in place so that if it's just going to be impossible with Union Pacific, we have alternatives that we can look at.
Sounds like smart planning. We appreciate your time today, Rachel. Thank you so much.